Okay, so just as we were trying to explain in the last bit of that video clip, the last one, SARS is better off if you look carefully, because we've said that they're getting an additional 1.1k extra in terms of VAT if things are not netting off, where you have the 80% thing, tax vendor in 100%. The buyer is basically would have not been entitled to a food input VAT deduction, and that's why it's better off. So they want this additional 1.1k, whereas if we try to nail it, basically to nail it home with the initial part where we started with the 20,000 rand sale taking place, if we also apply the same principle, because this part entails to the 30,000 part in terms of the sale, but in terms of the 20,000 rand sale, which would have been 80k, 20,000 rand. So let's see, 20,000 rand sale, 100%. That 20,000. Yes, this is the part that I'm looking for. Excuse me for the long delay. So indeed, this one is for the 30,000 rands, right? And this one is for the 20,000 rands, where our input was 3,000 rands. 3,000 rands. Just to try not confuse you, let me basically say 3k. You understand that we basically meant to say 3,000 rands, not to confuse you. 3,000 rands in terms of the input output VAT that was due to the seller, as opposed to 2.5k. So in this instance, the net amount for SARS would have only been 600, you know. So that's the difference that SARS is basically after, because this would have been now at a lower amount. Than take this 20, maybe if this 20,000 rand was the actual consideration of the transaction. So if it was the actual consideration of the transaction at less than market value, for instance, you know, now versus where the 30,000 rands is actually the market value. So that's why SARS market value. So that's why SARS would basically say in one of the requirements, the buyer would not have been entitled to food input tax deduction. Therefore, the price is at open market value. Because if they didn't include this part, then we would have likely charged the actual output VAT due to be paid to SARS at the actual consideration, which would have been that transaction. And in that instance, SARS was only going to claim 600 rands in terms of the additional VAT payable to them as a result of comparing your output VAT to your input, which would have been claimed by the taxable supplier, who was a buyer in this instance, making taxable supplies of 80%, whereas the 20% was an exempt supply. So that would have been the main catch that SARS is after. Whereas if he's now transacting at a market value of 30,000 rands, SARS is getting a lot more. Whereas in terms of getting 1.1k in terms of the additional VAT, comparing that with 3.6k of the VAT input versus paying 4.5k. In actual fact, we are wrong. It's not 1.1k additionally, but it's actually 900 rands. Excuse us for that error. an additional 900 rands that SARS is getting as an additional VAT. So please refer back to this error in terms of the mistake in conclusion with the last part that we did. But that's basically what we're talking about. So SARS is after a higher output VAT, because that's why now they would have given you this funny requirement having to be met, and that is why we have this principle basically. I hope it makes sense in that regard. So that's basically where we are in terms of the connected person special rules taking place, so just be very mindful of that. The trigger would be part 3. The buyer would not have been entitled to a full input tax deduction, and that's why I've been giving you this calculation just to make it a bit more understandable as to what benefit there would be. Why would there be such a funny requirement? I hope it makes sense, and yeah, we will move on with the next clip, with the next topic that we have to be dealing with.